What did Cormac McCarthy think of Flannery O'Connor? And what's so beautiful about O'Connor's and McCarthy's connection is that McCarthy really saw himself as the new generation of Southern Gothic. Because in 1962, Faulkner died, and in 1964, O'Connor died. And in 1965, McCarthy published his first novel, The Orchard Keeper. And McCarthy had a way out because in 1957, when he left the Air Force, he went down and moved to San Francisco and was hanging out with the beat writers and thinking that he could integrate into that scene. But for whatever reason, he decided he didn't mesh with that and decided to return to Tennessee to pursue becoming a writer. And if you guys don't know, Right Conscious is the headquarters of everything related to Cormac McCarthy here on YouTube. If you look at the playlist down below, I have over 170 videos on McCarthy where I talk about his life, his books, and his influences. And you will find no other deep dive on an author like this anywhere on YouTube. But McCarthy returns to the University of Tennessee for his second stint and meets his first wife, who was also in the writing program, and he's writing and really starting to feel himself. And he publishes 2 short stories and wins a contest, Awake for Susan and A Drowning Incident. And he's interviewed by the local paper or the college newspaper because oh, wow, here's this guy and he seems like a talented young writer, because parts of both of those short stories actually made their way into The Orchard Keeper. And McCarthy says, when asked, how did you get so good? Because one of the scarier things, you guys, about Cormac McCarthy is that when you look at his writing experience, he had written for about 4 to 5 years at most when he submitted his original manuscript to Random House for his novel, The Orchard Keeper. And I've been to the Cormac McCarthy archive and read the early drafts of The Orchard Keeper. And let me tell you guys, it is really good. If I know some of you guys maybe have a problem with The Orchard Keeper, but once you understand the novel, it's very good. And when you look at his sentence structure and how he's writing, it is better than I can personally write after 12 years of training in fiction. It's better than any of my colleagues who were in MFA programs or graduate school or whatever, any of the writing groups I've ever been in, any of the novels or writing I've seen you guys send me or post online. It was better than all that. And this was his first splash into the scene. And, it really made me think oh, wow, talent is really important here. But McCarthy doesn't talk about his talent. Instead, he talks about O'Connor and others in this quote. Quote, practical advice, I believe, would be to read. You have to know what's been done, and you have to understand it. I like the gutsy writers, Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, Joyce, Faulkner. I like Melville particularly, and more recently, Flannery O'Connor. She has a wonderful sense of the macabre. And actually connecting to this, in his 2009 interview, he said that, quote, when asked why he started to write, which happened around this time, someone asked Flannery O'Connor why she wrote, and she said, because I was good at it. And I think that's the right answer. If you are good at something, it's very hard not to do it. And so there you have it. McCarthy, we actually have 4 quotes today. So at this time, before his composition of The Orchard Keeper and before he started to work on it, he started to read Flannery O'Connor. And we already know that he had read Faulkner. And McCarthy saw himself, and I think the reason he decided to move from San Francisco was because he saw this space, he saw this market opportunity, because as I talked about before, McCarthy moved to El Paso and started writing Westerns because he knew that they were more accessible. He has said that everybody knows about cowboys and Indians and about the West, so I decided to write about that, because he was sick of writing about, Southern Gothic stuff that never sold. But I think he got a false sense of security and confidence, because a lot of us do this kind of weird math in our head. We see an author. I don't have any good books lying around for this, but we see an author and we're like, okay, this guy's good and this guy's been edited. So even if I wrote at 80% of this guy's level and, maybe got an editor or a small house published me, I could even make 10 or 20% of what he makes. I could get some sales going. I have a chance. But unfortunately, it just doesn't work like that, because McCarthy saw this opportunity to become the postmodernist Southern Gothic author, because in 1962, Nabokov released A Pale Fire. And I think in 1959, William S. Burroughs released A Naked Lunch, and McCarthy was in the whole beat scene. And one could say that McCarthy's kind of early novels combine Southern Gothic stuff, beat writing, and postmodernism, because when you look at The Orchard Keeper, it's literally a recollection of a memory, and that's why it's written in a confusing way. Outer Dark is literally a nightmare turned into reality. There are supernatural humans and creatures in Outer Dark and in The Orchard Keeper. which compared to Faulkner and O'Connor, they never really did that, and they never did postmodernist framings. Child of God features a necrophiliac, almost predicting what Ted Bundy and others were going to do years later. And Suttree is just kind of a wide-ranging postmodernist grab bag about, life in Knoxville. And I wouldn't say that they are exclusively postmodernist novels, but that's the slot that McCarthy saw. But even with a massive push, so The Orchard Keeper was featured in the New York Times book review. It had blurbs by multiple authors who were big at the time. And over the course of 20 years, it only sold 3,000 copies, everybody. And every book actually since then has, until he blew up in 1992, sold less. He eventually got down to selling 1,800 copies for Blood Meridian over 7 years. But you have to know what's been done. That's what McCarthy says. If you know what's been done, if you read these people, then you know how to take it to the next level. And that's an element that a lot of writers are missing. Because why would you release something that hasn't taken something to the next level? When you release a book, if you send me your novel, and please don't send me your novel, I have too much going on right now. But if it's not better, or at least remixing or at the same level than everybody else back on my bookshelf or on my to-read list, you're asking me to sit down and spend 5 to 8 hours of my life reading something. That's when someone recommends you a book, that's what they're saying. A movie takes 2.5 hours, and it's passive. You don't have to take any energy out. You can just sit there and imagine if filmmakers used special effects from the 1960s and said oh, well, this is just my creative vision. This is what I want. This is all I can handle. This is all we can handle here. You'd be like, okay, that's good, but we're just not going to watch it. And that's what makes writing such a crazy game, because we're competing with people who have dedicated their life to it. Recluses, McCarthy wasn't a recluse, but someone who put the time in and dedicated his life to it. And recluses like Emily Dickinson and, in philosophy, Immanuel Kant and all these other types of people. And so here you are with a job, with a spouse, with a total life. And then we wonder why no one wants to read our stuff. We wonder why the reading market is dying, and it's because we're not taking things to the next level. Even though I love the Beatles and I see their genius, when I hear music in 2024, if you go deep enough, there's better stuff out there. Even though there is a purity to the Beatles music, and it's was perfect and the highest level that you could reach at the time. And speaking of Pale Fire and Cormac McCarthy, over in the Right Conscious Book Club, which is starting tomorrow, we are reading 3 Cormac McCarthy novels and some of the other greatest and most difficult novels ever written. You will not find any other book club online that any other booktuber or anyone else that I know of runs that is more intensive than this. Of course, you do not need to read all 11 books with us at once, but these are your options. And there's more that just didn't fit on the screen. We got Gravity's Rainbow, 1Q84, Infinite Jest, William T. Volman, Confederacy of the Dunces, a Bolaño novel, Moby Dick, Nabokov, and more. And if you're seeing this in the future, we will be reading 6 to 10 novels another time as soon as we finish these. And so also in the Right Conscious Substack, you get access to the Cormac McCarthy course, which is already over 25 hours in length. I host daily office hours where you can come to talk to me about various topics, ask questions, or just hang out. I also offer email and comment support if you just want to comment your thoughts. And there is also a Right Conscious accountability writing group where we post daily poems and a weekly short story or prose piece to get you guys moving, to ensure that one day you can gain the skills and be good enough to say hey, you should pay to read my stuff. And that's the difference, I should say. And this is where my whole mentality is shifting. What's great about the internet is that if you tell someone, hey, read my stuff, and it's free and it's just a click away on a website, who cares? That's not scummy to do. That's nice to do. You're sharing your art into the world for free. But if you're attaching a price tag to it and you're making someone sit down over 5 hours, if someone, your blog post or your short story will only take 30 minutes at most to read, and it's free online. And that's where, the training ground is. It's on Substack right now. It's on WordPress, wherever you are posting. And everyone should get out of their shell and be posting online, because it's the fastest way to improve. Getting something out there and saying, this is final, somebody read it, really changes your mentality toward writing. I know that having to release a daily poem has made me just way better over the last month or two, because I'm always in writing mode. I just can't get out of it. And now I have momentum. Anyway, all of this, if you are interested, is in the link down below, alongside my free writing school, my Cormac McCarthy t-shirt website, my Instagram, and everything else. And so let us get back to the video. So speaking of Cormac McCarthy writing for money and wanting to gain some fame, the Southern Gothic thing wasn't working. And so he decides, and his wife was badgering him hey, why don't you write stuff or go get a job? So he divorces his second wife and moves to El Paso. But in 1975, 1965, a year after he moved to the West, he got this opportunity to write a screenplay for a film named The Gardener's Son. And I actually have The Gardener's Son movie posted on this channel if you guys are interested. And around that same time, there was also an adaptation made with similar cast members and stuff of Flannery O'Connor's Wise Blood. And McCarthy, while writing a letter, said, quote, "Wise Blood has not appeared here yet. A number of people have told me that the film is just first rate. The lead, Brad Dourif, is the actor who played Bob McAvoy in The Gardener's Son, and Ned Beatty was also in both films. I'll keep my eye out for any sign of it appearing in these parts. I think the film has a peculiar history. Some friends of Flannery's getting together and deciding to do it and asking Hudson if he would direct. He agreed, never thinking they would get the money. And they turned up with it not too long afterwards. Money from Germany, if I'm not mistaken." And so this quote just kind of shows that he's interested, that he knows about Wise Blood, that he wants to see the film. And what's also cool about this is around this time, he was actually trying with the same director and with some of the same actors to do an adaptation of Faulkner's As I Lay Dying. And that's actually one of the unreleased McCarthy things that maybe we will get. So there are apparently 2 unreleased novels that McCarthy said that he was working on. There is the Blood Meridian screenplay. There is another screenplay that we don't know, that McCarthy has said in a letter that he was writing about. We don't really know about that. And then there is the As I Lay Dying screenplay that he finished, but it just never got published. Where is all that stuff? Will it ever be released? I don't know, but I at least know that there are 2 novels and 3 screenplays that will maybe hopefully be released one day, or at least, put in the archive or something. So speaking of correspondences, Flannery O'Connor has a great book out there, and I would recommend you guys read it because it's called A Habit of Being. And actually circling back, because I forgot to talk about this, the reason that McCarthy's Southern Gothic novels like Child of God and stuff didn't really kick off is that so McCarthy releases The Orchard Keeper in 1965, then I think Outer Dark comes out in like 1968 or around there. But you got to look at what was happening with postmodernism at the time. So Nabokov releases Pale Fire in 62, then Lost in the Funhouse by John Barth comes out in 68, I think. But if you look at the culture of the time, free spirit, free love. And, when you look at some of the novels like Richard Farina's Been Down So Long It Looks Like Up to Me, very chill, kind of relaxed novel, nothing too crazy. Farina was actually a friend of Bob Dylan and was in the music scene and decided to write a psychedelic novel. Another one, Nog by Rudolf Wurlitzer, came out in 68. Then I think Trout Fishing in America by Richard Brautigan, which I actually recommend this one. Everyone should read this one. Came out in 67. But they all had a very light, airy, psychedelic quality to them. And that's where they took postmodernism. And obviously, if you look at Jefferson Airplane, the Beatles, and all the music at the time, it was very light and airy. People didn't want to sit down and read Outer Dark about an incestuous family, even if it was postmodernist and progressive. They didn't want to read Child of God or The Orchard Keeper. It just didn't really hit with the kind of culture of the time. And I think that it was also too progressive for old people. I don't think old people who were reading modernist writers or even Faulkner could wrap their heads around postmodernism and fragmentations of memories and supernatural beings in Southern Gothic literature. I just think he was wrong place, wrong time. If he was writing books like this today or in the 1990s when shit started to get dark again, I think he would have done great. People have been like, oh, wow, which obviously is why he had success with No Country for Old Men and The Road, and even the Border Trilogy, which, as I talked about in my videos a couple days ago, which I know a lot of you guys haven't seen. If you haven't seen my video about the darkness in All the Pretty Horses, you should go check it out. I released it about 5 days ago, and I explore a hidden scene in the novel that is one of the darkest things McCarthy ever wrote, but he kind of hid it. And one of the things that came out of the hippie movement, which is still present today, because in the early 1960s, with the National Endowment of Arts, artists started to get money just for writing, just for existing. And MFA programs started to crop up. And the philosophy at the time and the axiomatic process of it was to be kind. And people are always like, in my MFA program, we critique. Yes, I understand critiquing people, but have you ever been in a paid program? So if someone joins my writing group and they send me something bad, I'm just going to tell them like, hey, this is bad. Try again. I'm just going to be honest. And I know that may turn some people off and everyone wants to be affirmed, but maybe I'll say I like this, but like as a whole, this sucked. And there is also a level, especially with people trying to go on this novelist publishing, I'm going to be famous route, that I've been in those classes, I've been in those workshops, and there are people who, when you read their writing, it's like, you should just quit now. Don't quit your day job for this. I don't know how you got here, but I don't think that this whole vision is going anywhere. And you're not allowed to say that because they are paying you, even if you have a fellowship or whatever, there's almost a sense of entitlement because you're paying $15,000 to $20,000 a year. And so it's their job to help you. It's not your job to tell them like, just get out of here. This is terrible. Because if you did that and you drove people away, then the whole program would collapse. I used to have this yoga teacher, and this lady was so fun, man. She was so crazy though. We were doing Ashtanga Vinyasa yoga, Mysore style. So you would show up in the morning at like 5 a.m. and do a set sequence every single day. And people would come in for the first time and she would tell them like, don't come back. Like, you're too fat, you're too this. Like, she would shame them out of there. But she's like, you have no ability to progress. Like, unless you change your entire life and dedicate everything, like, I'm just wasting my time on you. Like, I don't want you here. It was wild. And she just didn't need the money. She was a little bit older and like retired or something. And it was kind of cool to see that because in our capitalistic economy, we really don't have that anymore. The reason I'm mentioning all this is because McCarthy writes down while writing Blood Meridian, Flannery O'Connor's book of correspondences called A Habit of Being. And in it, he takes some sections. So we quote some sections of what she's writing about. And in those sections, she's criticizing the authors Nelson Algarin and Celine for not focusing enough on aesthetics, for not actually being beautiful writers. And what's funny about O'Connor, and something that we're not allowed to do now, we get told not to do it, is that O'Connor was heavily criticizing authors and like almost polemically. She would say in her letters, I have to stop using polemics. She would be just dissing on other authors. And this is something that was a big thing in the 50s and the 60s. When you look at an author like Robert Bly, they would just sit and shit on people in their literary magazines. And now we can't do that because if I sit and I criticize Rupi Kaur or Ocean Vuong, I'm just the white man criticizing the marginalized voice. Somebody likes it out there. Art is subjective. You maybe don't like it, but if I show someone, anyway, don't get me going. You can obviously, if you have an illiterate person write a poem and then you compare it to even a Rupi Kaur poem, everyone's going to be like, oh, the Rupi Kaur poem is better. Well, I don't know about that. But there's obviously levels of quality in art. And when you reach those levels, like, is William Faulkner or Cormac McCarthy better? Was Pound or T.S. Eliot better? When people are at the same level, we can have a debate. But is Rilke or Bob Dylan, they're not on the same level, like, of the ability to write. Anyway, so McCarthy used her criticism of that to amplify his description of the Glanton Gang, because this was actually when he mentions it. At the start of Blood Meridian, when we're getting to know the Glanton Gang, really no spoilers here, after the kid takes off with them out of Chihuahua, in the early drafts of Blood Meridian, McCarthy didn't have really any descriptive elements. Actually read more like Samuel Chamberlain's My Confessions. He didn't really add the flowery language, and that was common for him to kind of add that more at the end. But I think he really wanted to like give us a good look at Tovine and Tobin and Glanton and everybody. And that's why I think we stopped at multiple places. I think that's why he added the tarot scene and like among many others before any of the kind of intense melee action started, because we really were like, okay, I'm down with them. And so to conclude, where are all the critics now? That's something I've wanted to talk about. I just don't know if that's really viable as a video. But back in the 50s, back in the 60s, even earlier, there was one difference, in the 1950s, maybe 15 serious books of poetry would be released every single year. But by the 1960s, that number had turned into hundreds. And so you didn't necessarily have the ability, because some like Robert Lowell would release a book of poetry, or Flannery O'Connor would release a novel, and everyone would be like, oh shit, Flannery's releasing a novel. And everyone would write about it. And eventually it became too great and too politicized and too lovey-dovey to be able to write about these people. But so an author would write and release a novel, and then all the other writers would tell their opinions on it in magazines all across the country. And it was honestly like a lot of, a form of income. And it's crazy to think back that people, back decades ago would be sitting there thinking like, oh shit, I want to see what Right Conscious has to say about this new novel, but I have to go subscribe to this literary journal and pay the money. And so that's how a lot of these places were keeping afloat. Anyway, so Cormac McCarthy was, from what I can see, a big fan of O'Connor. She really influenced his work. And I'm glad he decided to take that opportunity. I'm glad that he did do those Southern novels, even though they are heavily unread compared to his other novels. I think looking back, he really did make that progression, and he may be the last real Southern Gothic novelist out there. And for that, I salute you, Cormac McCarthy, and thanks to Faulkner and Flannery O'Connor for inspiring him.